political appointees hired by the governor to run state government. Armed with fat paychecks, they are deputy cabinet secretaries, PR flacks, museum directors, administrative assistants. The governor doles out about 450 policy-making jobs throughout state government. Now, those positions are exempt from state personnel rules, so really, the governor can hire whoever he wants. Sources tell us that it is not unusual for the governor to order state agencies to put inexperienced appointees on the state payroll and pay them big salaries. Case in point, India Hatch, a political hire with a state career orchestrated by the governor. She was hired to run the state racing commission, but she had no racing experience. Later, the governor moved her to the gaming control board. Well, she had no gaming experience. Next stop, the film museum. You guessed it, no museum experience. Last year, India Hatch landed back at the racing commission. The governor's office ordered the agency to stick her in a deputy director's job and pay her $88,000 a year. Now, in light of the state budget crisis, the governor is coming under fire for his hiring practices.
People are not as well qualified under governor exempt positions. They're making more money. Their duties and responsibilities are not well defined. And that's the part that I have a problem with.
For example, Sharon Maloof, executive director of the State Film Museum. Now, the Film Museum is perhaps New Mexico's most unusual cultural property. It's not in the phone book. There's no exhibits, no visitors, and no staff. In fact, there's no museum, just an office. What they do have, however, is an executive director. Last year, the governor put Sharon Maloof in charge of a staff of none at a non-existent museum, paying her $88,000 a year. Miss Maloof became the highest-paid museum director in the state system. Stuart Ashman is the Cultural Affairs Cabinet Secretary.
Who set that salary?
That's set by the personnel, the HR director in the governor's office.
So why would the legislature fund a museum director's job for a non-existent museum? Well, they didn't.
There is a sitting legislature right now.
That's right.
And they decided not to fund this position, but you're doing it anyway.
That's right.
The resources that are being used from Office of Cultural Affairs need to be dedicated to the museums. They don't need to be dedicated to this unauthorized position that absolutely has no facility.
Last month, Secretary Ashman cut Sharon Maloof's salary to $55,000. It took a bit of hocus pocus for governor's aide Paul Shipley to land a high-paying state job that did not exist. In June, the governor transferred Shipley to the New Mexico Film Office to do public relations at $95,000 a year. That's more than we pay the state treasurer.
Was Paul recruited by this office, or was he sent over here from the governor's office?
We didn't actively recruit Paul.
Who set a salary of $95,000 a year?
I believe that was set by the governor's office.
The problem?
Has the legislature authorized a head of publicity and media relations for specifically the film office, Paul Shipley's job?
No, sir.
But that didn't keep Shipley from working at the film office. They simply gave him a fancy title, division director. Perhaps they thought nobody would notice.
So his job title, division director, he wasn't actually a division director?
No, absolutely not.
It was just a title, a slot to put him in?
Absolutely.
Oh, that's obviously a deception, in my opinion. And these people are sent over to different agencies, and those agencies have to rob their budgets to make those salaries available to them, and it distracts from the mission of those agencies.
Paul Shipley's job is not the only deception. Last year, the governor moved S.U. Mahesh to the tax department. He's the director of policy administration, or is he? That job title is pure fiction. Actually, he's the department's public information officer. His salary, $87,000 a year. His job? To churn out press releases and handle media inquiries. In November 2008, Governor Richardson ordered a statewide freeze on hiring and pay raises. There would be few exceptions. But our investigation found the governor has hired, transferred, or given pay raises to some 150 of his own exempt employees after the hiring freeze. Remember Hatch, Maloof, Mahesh, and Shipley? Well, all these governor exempts got their jobs after the hiring freeze.
What's good for the goose ought to be good for the gander. Especially if it's a directive coming from the governor, I would think that he would want to make sure that he is doing in his own house what he's asking everybody else to do.
In December, the governor pledged to trim the number of political jobs under his control. 59 high-paid exempt positions would be eliminated. In some cases, that too appears to be an illusion. For example, to cut costs, the governor eliminated Noah Trujillo's exempt position. Now, Trujillo was the number 2 guy at the Sports Authority. But Noah Trujillo wasn't fired. He was simply reclassified. While it's true Trujillo's exempt job was eliminated, he's still on the state payroll at the Sports Authority. Trujillo's job was simply switched to a classified position, which means he can't be fired except for cause. The governor did the same paper shuffle for Sports Authority Administrative Assistant Patricia Duran. One day she was exempt, the next day, like magic, she became classified and her job protected.
This is an abuse of power.
Republican Gary Johnson left the governor's office in 2002.
The current governor has taken this to a new art form in New Mexico. This has been political payback. It's not about efficiency. It's not about citizens of New Mexico. It's about hiring individuals for jobs on a political allegiance basis.
The bottom line is it's pretty dadgum frustrating to me to come up here and say I want to be fair to everyone when you see on a daily basis abuses are happening where the public's dollar is not being dispersed in an efficient, economical fashion, and there's a few that's benefiting more than others.
So how does the governor defend his own hiring practices? Well, he doesn't. Governor Richardson refused our repeated requests to be interviewed, and he would not allow any of his staff to comment. According to a spokesman, the governor feels he's going to be, quote, screwed on this story, and he doesn't want anything to do with it. Larry Barker, KRQE News 13.
What happens in Alaska stays in Alaska.
At least that's what the top brass at Sandia Labs hoped. They threw a shroud of secrecy over a tragic event involving Sandia engineers in the Alaskan backcountry 3 years ago. But you are entitled to know this secret because you're paying the multi-million-dollar bill for their dangerously dumb decision. Here's News 13 investigative reporter Larry Barker.
Just before dawn, a military rocket armed with a secret payload is launched off the coast of Alaska. The Pentagon touts the project a success. But something else happened here, something tragic, something the government kept quiet for 3 years. It was February 2006, a dark and bitter night in the rugged Alaskan backcountry. An incident so foolhardy and so reckless that it literally ruined lives. Kodiak is a remote sportsman's paradise. It was here that New Mexico engineers from Sandia Labs tested a secret missile radar system. But it wasn't rocket science that got Sandians in trouble.
We had a very tragic and unfortunate incident that happened in Alaska.
In your experience on the island, you ever seen anything like this before?
No, sir, I have not.
A successful liftoff wrapped up weeks of research. Sandia's engineers worked hard, and then they played hard. What happened next is documented in an internal investigation obtained by News 13. It's a report so sensitive, the lab will not make it public. The Sandians celebrated with a big party here at the Narrow Cape Lodge. It went on for much of the day. There were speeches, champagne toasts, chips and salsa, and booze. Lots of booze. One top Sandia manager was described as being tipsy, swaying, and slurring his speech. Post-launch bashes like this one in California are a Sandia tradition. On Kodiak, they partied with beer, champagne, whiskey, vodka, rum, and wine.